Hello, my name is Summer Simpson. I'm the VP of Product at Quantcast, and today we are going to chat about the data democracy and what we need to do to make sure that we maintain a free and open internet. So let's start by talking a little bit about something that people tend to forget or just kind of walk on by. The internet of today, the internet that people have really come to rely on is paid for by advertising, right? That is just an essential truth. It's what it is. There's content out there. There are other business models, subscription based, that sort of thing. But fundamentally, no matter where you go, articles that we stumble on through search, the medium and small news sites who cover local news and educate and inform us, hobbyist sites that entertain us and help us DIY it, and even larger platforms like Facebook that feed our digital social needs. They're all available to us because of the ad ecosystem that we've created, and all of that is powered by the data democracy. So first, I want to step back a little bit and kind of give you some background. And this is one of my favorite statements, so we'll sit there in the background while we talk about this. So I come from a journalism background. From an early age, from civics class on, I was very much obsessed with the idea of the fourth estate. I ran an underground newspaper in high school, launched a music and news magazine in college, and went to photojournalism school. Worked at my newspaper where I built their first website in 1994. So this idea, right, from the early days of this free and open access to news and information, it's kind of in my blood. And just that idea really fuels me. So when I came to Quantcast, I initially worked on our publisher suite of products and was eventually asked to quote unquote solve GDPR, which we did, and launched our first consumer facing product with our consent management platform. And then during that time, when I was solving GDPR, I remember in early 2018, this is before the May 25th deadline, I'm sitting in traffic, as we do in the Bay Area, looked at the car in front of me and I see this bumper sticker. And for folks who are like NPR fans, you've seen this before, right? And it said, "The free press is not free." And, just sit with that for a second, right? And really let that kind of sink in. I had, in all this swirl of wondering, how are we going to keep things going? How are we going to deal with GDPR? I had kind of missed this fundamental piece. And then, kind of getting that back in my head sort of regrounded me. And as consumers, we tend to forget that the content that we consume costs money to create. We also feel, a lot of times, we feel very much entitled to free access to this content, not really thinking too much about, where it comes from or how it gets there. But the content creators themselves, for all these websites that we visit, this is something that they think about every single day, right? How do we make the money to produce this content so that we can keep providing these services to our readers? And that's on top of the work that they do just to produce the news. So what I'm here today to talk about, virtually, talking to this crowd of people, the tech set, the digital creators, all stakeholders in this data democracy, and people like me, is to remind folks that, we created this internet thing. We put up the content for free. We got people to depend on it, and now it's really up to us to make sure that it doesn't go away. So we built a carefully curated technology ecosystem, and I see that a little bit tongue-in-cheek, very much knowing what the ecosystem looks like on the back end. But we rely on it to fund a free and open internet, right? It's critical. And this is reliant on trust from consumers that includes transparency and data rights. This is a fundamental contract that we make. So what is data democracy? Data democracy refers to an open data model whose main objective is to make a company's data widely accessible to the greatest number of people, if not to all. So central to this is data rights, allowing for consumers to have transparent control over their data. It's it's through a true data democracy that we can power the free and open internet. There's a value exchange that occurs here that funds the internet, and it's comprised of three major players, right? So the publishers who want to produce good, engaging content, right, and provide a service. Marketers who want to grab a piece of consumer attention and are willing to pay for it. And all of us, right, the consumers that are at the center of all of it. And we are perfectly willing to exchange our attention and data for free, valuable content to maintain open access to this information. But one of the over the years, as this ecosystem has developed out, in this need to achieve and succeed in tech, we've kind of broken this model a little bit. Democratization of the open web, free access to content is kind of now under threat from a lot of different directions. These threats are a result of two major oversights. First, we ignored consumer data rights. I guess our egos kind of got the best of us, but we built technologies reliant on audiences, but disregarded the fact that consumers and their data rights and trust are at the center of all of that and making that happen. We didn't invest in the infrastructure to protect their data from hacks and breaches. We've been hearing about it for the past several years. We didn't provide transparency and controls, and we excluded them from the conversation on this entirely. Second, we enabled the power of the few. So the rise of tech giants buying up smaller players in the space allowed them to define these rules. Now, while they've supported consumers in their rights, they're also businesses with their own interests that drive their decision making. I don't know if anybody's ever read the TOS for any online digital platform. Try it sometimes. It's good bedtime reading, but also some really interesting stuff in there. But without market competition comes less self-regulation. So this kind of concentration of power has resulted in some bad practices that are only now being addressed through government regulation. And then from that, investigation and oversight. Government regulation, this is one of those questions, right? Do you want people who aren't really all that tech savvy writing laws that actually control how tech is built and creative? Or do you really want the people who built it in the first place to actually fix it and make it work right? So the big question is this the internet apocalypse, or is it a catalyst for change? And whatever the answer to that question is, things will not and cannot stay the same. So let's look at this as an opportunity to embrace positive change. I think we need to go back to the basics. We need to restore the data democracy, but this time bring balance by putting the consumer at the center, giving them a seat at the table, so to speak. We as consumers have a right to privacy and data protection. So we need to find a way for both ad revenues and consumer control over our data to exist. This move towards asking consumers for their consent to their data, especially being used for advertising, is really kind of just the first evolution of this model. And finally realizing that a user is a part of this community and should have a voice in this process, right? So this is step one. It has potential to actually be a strength, if we approach this proactively. So as consumers, we demand transparency and control. It's part of our ask, right, in being at the table. And honestly, we deserve these rights as part of this data democracy. But the industry has created a mistrust, especially around privacy, which has caused a lot of backlash through broad and swift corrections. On the browser side, Apple released ITP, or Internet Tracking Protection, and we've got recent and even more changes upcoming around IDFA. Google announced that they will not support third-party cookies in 2022, kind of following in the path of Safari. These cookies have been for a very long time pretty much the glue that kind of holds together this ecosystem and makes everything function the way that we expect it to. And allowing not only for personalized advertising, but also frequency control, attribution, and just simple measurement of audiences. So basically, without cookies, everything kind of breaks and falls apart. We've seen a flurry of regional privacy laws that have been passed. I think at this point, everybody's very familiar with GDPR. In California, we have CCPA, which was also just updated, CPRA, which is Prop 24 from this past election. We see this expanding, right? We see countries all over the place basically taking GDPR cookie cutter, and applying it to their own country, like Brazil and Thailand, Canada and Australia, I think, are next. Many other regions are really starting to expand this. It's getting to be a global thing. So these are laws and standards that we have to uphold. But the other side of this is the market perception of ourselves. And some customers that we've talked to have told me, they basically apply their GDPR and CCPA compliance work globally just to be, kind of better safe than sorry. But when thinking about about consumer data rights, there are really kind of two kinds of consent that we have to consider. There's implicit and there's explicit. Implicit consent is, as an example, subscribing to an email on a publisher site, and then that email is used everywhere in the ecosystem. Explicit consent means that a user is actually, when they do that subscription, they're actually told how that email is going to be used, who's going to be using it, and for what purposes. And Quantcast from the get-go, really deeply believes in this explicit consent approach. And we think that the world will follow suit and operate in a world of explicit consent moving forward. So the days of, continue to scroll and we assume that you've given consent, that's not going to last for much longer. So these these broad and swift corrections have changed the way the internet now works. So often when we talk about data privacy, we're thinking about it in terms of business outcomes, but ultimately we're trying to address consumers and address their concerns over their data. That's the fundamental reasoning behind it. Privacy needs to be approached from the perspective of the end user, the consumer, and how they can access the content that they rely on. A great example of this is the impact that consent management platforms have had on the user experience across Europe. To provide a little context, CMPs are the way that publishers have conversations with their consumers, provide them transparency into what's happening with their data, and collect their consent. But the CNP solution, like with any good solution, sometimes you end up with a downside, right? And it has actually caused a problem in the ecosystem. So we've created a system where every site that a user visits requires, they're required to provide transparency and obtain consumer consent for their own site, right? Which results in the consumer seeing pop-ups on every single page, at least for the publishers that are compliant, that they come across. But what we found is that, when you see so many pop-ups, what typically ends up happening is people just get used to seeing them, and then they just often start blindly accepting and consenting just to get it out of the way so they can carry on with their browsing and view the content. So, it makes you ask the question, right? So, when you're just blindly consenting, are you really making a thoughtful choice? Does this really, give you greater control over your data, or are you just kind of like ignoring it and we're back to where we were, square one? But, in trying to provide data and privacy rights, we've essentially created a really poor user experience. And it's not just us who see it. We see this on Twitter and other social media all the time. Folks like Joe Elvin, who is the executive editor at the Daily Mail in the UK, and even folks like Elon Musk have all been talking about how these new protections have created a horrible user experience and interrupted their free and open access to that content. But we all feel the consumer's pain. We absolutely do it at Quantcast, and it's something that my team is focused on, every single day. As an early player, Quantcast, we deeply understand the digital ecosystem. We deeply understand ad tech, and we've spent the last few years really deeply understanding consumer privacy. And the laws and regulations around that, and just the needs of consumers and what their expectations are. We've been publisher focused and privacy first since day one when we launched Quantcast Measure back in the day, and obviously since we launched Quantcast Choice in 2018. Building on the success of Quantcast Choice, we recently launched Primissio, which is our new privacy preferences portal, and what this does is puts transparency and control back into the hands of consumers by providing them with the ability to easily customize and then apply those privacy settings across all their favorite websites in one place, right? So it's like a centralized kind of privacy wallet, so to speak. So what you do is you create a login, allowing your consent preferences to be recognized and then respected across a variety of sites, bringing back, we hope, an enjoyable browsing experience because you're seeing fewer of these pop-ups, even though your preferences are still being communicated to publishers and to their vendors and other third parties that they work with to make sure that those rights are then actually respected. So solving this customer pain and reducing disruption to the consumption of news and information online without actually losing sight of consumer data privacy and protection is pretty much, it's very critical to our mission as a company. Ultimately, we want a free and open internet, and we want this to be powered by the data democracy. We want consumers to have free access to the news and information necessary for them to stay informed about their world. And these days, we all know how critical that is. And we want publishers to keep monetizing their content so they can continue to produce it and inform a vibrant ecosystem. And we want them to be able to monetize it in a way that doesn't cause disruption in terms of who actually ends up having free and open access to that content, right? And it doesn't come down to the socioeconomic capabilities of a consumer to be able to maintain that access. So we very much believe, and I fundamentally believe that this is all worth fighting for. Keeping this democracy alive, enabling consumer data rights is more than just maintaining the status quo, right? We as a tech ecosystem, as players in this ecosystem, need to move beyond the status quo and really figure out how to do this right? And it's all about evolving in a deliberate and proactive way. And fundamentally, it's really about thinking and acting consumer first and consent first. Thank you.